Well, hello there, friends, and welcome to Halfway There. This is Eric Nevins, your host, and this is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. Today, guys, I know that we didn't have a episode last week, and due to some scheduling conflicts, I didn't actually get any interviews completed for you this week, but I have a couple of conversations that are going to be really good coming up in the next couple of weeks, and so I hope you'll stick around. In the meantime, the archives are big enough that I think if you go back a little ways, there's something that you can enjoy, and that's going to encourage you. In fact, today we're going to do a replay of a conversation that I did with a gentleman who had a really amazing story about how he came to Christ. Not just how he found Christ, but how the fact that that you never quite know how God is going to use what he's asked you to do. And that if you're just faithful to what it is that God has asked you to do, you may never see the results. You may never even know what happened or how God used it. You may think it's a failure, may think it's not worth it, but God uses it, and he will. And so in this conversation, that was really something that I took away from it. It's something that when people ask me which episodes of the show they should start with, I mentioned this one and I mentioned one other one, which maybe I'll replay some other time. But this is one of my favorite conversations that we've done in the last couple of years because I just learned so much from it. So I'm going to leave you with this replay of my conversation with Dan Rudman and his story that I called Ripples of the Gospel. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. This is episode number 41. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm glad that you have. This is a show all about just how God sometimes does things that are unexpected and how he leads us through events that are unexpected. I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a moment. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Eric Nevins. I'm the host of Halfway There, and you need to know that you can get show notes for every single episode of Halfway There at halfwaytherepodcast.com. Please do check that out, especially when we mention books or links or resources. That's all in the show notes. You don't have to try to remember it. You just go to halfwaytherepodcast.com and you're going to be able to find it. Scroll down a little bit and you'll see all the most recent episodes there. I hope that you will do that and find it helpful. Well, my guest today is someone who shares a bunch of stories with us about what God has done in his life and where he's going. And one of them that really struck me is the way that he comes to Christ. So when you listen to this, just listen to it because it's very interesting. He has the idea that maybe the guy who initially started the seeds, or let's say planted the seeds of faith in his life, actually maybe thought he was a failure. And I thought that was really interesting when you think about how sometimes we do things and we don't know what the result of them are. Maybe we even feel like we failed. And sometimes God takes those things and makes something out of them, and we never know. But he knows, and it's all for his glory anyway. I hope that you'll enjoy hearing that story and the rest of the stories that my guest today has to share. This is my conversation with Dan Rudman.
My name is Dan Rudman. I currently live in Kansas, grew up in Michigan, and I've actually been involved with full-time Christian ministry for almost the last 30 years. So, not a pastor. I'm not on staff at a church. I'm kind of a street guy in the sense that I travel and I speak and I'm out and about. I'm on universities. I'm in the jail every week. I'm with men in the community every week. And so I like to be out there with people in the marketplace of life, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's what I do.
it sounds
Yeah.
like you have a kind of an eclectic ministry.
Yeah, it's all about talking about the word. I mean, if you got around me, you'd say, I'll pretty much do the same sort of stuff, but it's helping people understand the gospel, the reality of Christ, answering questions in regards to that. Is this thing for true? How do we know it's for true? So I do a lot of that. And then bringing the scriptures to bear, speaking at different types of conferences and churches and that sort of thing. So I do a lot of that.
Yeah, great. Well, let's go back a little ways, or maybe all the way. So tell me, where did you grow up?
Yeah. I grew up in northern Michigan. I guess you'd think kind of a traditional blue-collar family. My dad was a police officer. My mom always was some type of secretary, many times working I remember working there in the court system and for different people. And I was the only boy. I had a couple sisters. And so a lot of life there was a lot about sports and the outdoors. We had one little movie theater in town that might have a same movie for a number of weeks. And I didn't see them all till I was 18. And so it was small town, northern Michigan, out in the kind of country a little bit. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So kind of rural.
Yeah, a little bit. It was a small town, so I lived in town, but it was just a small little town with, one little high school and a small few blocks of a downtown main street. And yeah. So, it's not totally rural, but a small town northern Michigan. But again, when you think of, what did the guy do on the weekend? If it wasn't some kind of sports, it was going to be hunting and fishing for the most part.
Right. Which I know that's something that you still do that you really enjoy.
Yeah. If you come here, I'm sitting in my office. Yeah, there's lots of, critters on the walls and pictures everywhere and bow and arrows and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, that's my world.
Yeah,
sort of.
that's awesome. Which
Yeah.
Kansas is a good place to do that too.
Yeah, it's kind of known for that. And so, yeah, I live out in the country a little bit south of town, and so I look out my window and can see, critters, and I enjoy that. So, yeah.
Nice. Are you one of those people that sees a deer and just thinks venison?
No, not really. I have kind of a romance with these rascals, like I really just think they're beautiful animals. I love being engaged with it. So I do enjoy meat. Don't get me wrong. We put stuff in the freezer every year, but I kind of do like, big antlers, and I enjoy the whole process, the whole thing. I love the conservation. I actually grew up, I would say I was my family, uncles and that were kind of I'd say, kind of traditional conservationists. It was something about being engaged with wildlife and enjoying that process and caring for it. As a kid, we planted lots of trees in northern Michigan. We worked on fire roads. We did a lot in the outdoors because we cared for it. So,
Yeah, awesome.
yeah.
Cool. Well, so what I'm curious about is when did you come to Christ? Was it in your family, or was it later?
Yeah, no, so I grew up in a home, again, when I think of it, it sort of felt like what I think of as this traditional, moral, middle-class family. Again, my dad was a police officer, very, very honorable, noble policeman, known for that, and so I grew up with a kind of a moralist world where you kind of talked about God being out there somewhere, maybe, like Christmas and Easter, and maybe a few more times when I was a kid. Probably by the time I was 14 to 15, I really didn't have any engagement with the church whatsoever. And so if you were to ask me, I knew some of the, facts about things, but I really never understood there was this reality a person could actually have a relationship with Christ. And so when you think of this message that goes to the world called the gospel, I don't think I could have told you that. And so there was something about being, you sort of knew you were supposed to be this good person, I guess, law abiding. And, that was kind of my background. And so then I went away to the university, and somewhere in my head, here again, I don't know if I ever articulated it, but somehow I thought, success was being good in athletics, being good in academics, somewhere in my head, this idea of an academic All-American. And I wasn't good enough on either of those fronts to accomplish that. I played a little bit of college football. I was a pretty good high school athlete. pretty good at academically. I could get B's and a few A's, but I was never going to be the academic all-American kind of person. And so, like a lot of freshmen in university, there was a sort of sense, I guess, I was kind of lost, wondering who I am and what I'm going to do with my life and what's the future. And so, I entered the university that way. Kind of floundered around my freshman year, chasing after wrong kinds of things, and the weekend partying thing and all that goes with that. Some of it's probably embarrassing to some degree, and
yeah,
it's something you just don't want to talk about anymore. But the typical guy like that kind of again, I would have kind of stiff-armed somebody probably trying to talk to me about something what I would have thought is religious. I would have thought, nah, that's for certain kinds of people that they cut their hair, they can't listen to rock and roll, and they can't have fun.
Right?
Can't dance or something. I mean, that would have been my mindset behind it. So there in the university, I was kind of floundering my freshman year. Near the end of my freshman year, I walked through a dorm lobby one night, dormitory. I was walking through the lobby, and there was a film being shown. I remember one of our resident assistants was showing, had this film being played, and it was this guy talking about some relationships stuff, guy-girl relationships. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And as I watched it, I can't even tell you why, but I became very suspicious. Like, I'll bet this is going to get religious on me.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'll bet this is. And so I don't want to hear that. And so I left. I remember leaving. Again, this is, I'm 56 now, so that would have been like 36 years ago. But I remember walking away from there thinking, I don't want to hear this. But I also remember going back to my room and kind of pacing around thinking, I wonder what he's going to say. I wonder if it's something I need to hear. And at the time, I couldn't have explained what was going on. But, God was doing something in my life, and I didn't even know it.
Right.
And so I went back up and I stood in the shadows. Really, again, I have often wondered that guy that put that on, he probably thought the whole night was a flop because probably, nobody was really interested or anything. But I was standing in the shadows listening to this guy talk about, in fact, it turned out to be, I don't know if people know the name now, he's an older man now, but his name was Josh McDowell.
Oh, sure.
That was the film being shown. And, I didn't know at that time who it was. It took years later, I started piecing it all together, but at the time I'm standing in shadows watching this presentation about relationships. And then sure enough, he got into talking about, at the time it would have been what I would thought was religious things. He started talking about Jesus Christ, and he started talking about the evidence for Christ. And in some ways, maybe he sought out to disprove it as a student or something, and it kind of backfired. He found out it was true. And, so there was that part of his story. And then he talked about a person could have a relationship with Christ, and he kind of helped people understand what that meant, and they could actually put their trust in Christ right there, which, again, I don't remember all the words he used. I just remember I don't know about that. I was really suspicious. And so I just kind of listened. But then when he was done, this was the thing that got me. He said, if you did actually somehow maybe respond to his decision, this time he led people to put their trust in Christ or something, he said, find a Bible. And it seems to me, if I recall right, he said, find a Bible and read the first 3 chapters of John 3 times to help you understand what this is all about. And it's funny now because it's, 30 some years ago. I remember thinking, well, I'm going to go find a Bible and read the contract. I want to see what this has to say before I commit to anything.
Yeah.
So I went and found the Bible, and see, this just tells you, I didn't even know when he said, this idea of a gospel of John, I didn't even know what that was. And so I started flipping through the Bible, and I somehow ended up near the end of the Bible in this thing. There was this John with a 1 in front of it. Right. And there was a John with a 2 in front of it, this John with a 3 in front of it, and I thought, well, there's 3 of them. And of course he meant, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I didn't know.
Right.
And so I looked at it and said, well, it must be the first one anyway. And so I started reading that. I started reading 1 John. And to be honest with you, by the time I got through chapter 3, I was totally confused. And I thought, well, this doesn't make much sense. Whatever he wanted me to read just somehow helped make sense. It didn't make any sense. To be honest with you, it really didn't. So I thought, well, maybe he wanted me to keep reading. And so I kept reading. And I got to chapter 4, and I really was struck. Started talking about don't believe every spirit. There's spirits in the world, and the Spirit of God, every spirit that confesses Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And I thought, okay, so every spirit that actually believes that just Jesus came in the flesh. And of course, I just heard this guy talking about how he found evidence for that,
Right.
And so as I read through that, it talks about the Antichrist is already amongst us, the spirit of the Antichrist. And I just remember realizing like evil was real. That's really what struck me, believe it or not. Like I was reading this going like evil's real.
Wow.
And it's somehow this Jesus being on this earth, actually walking, has some part in this whole thing. So these pieces are coming together for me, And then so I kept reading, and I got to John chapter 5, 1 John 5, and it says, "He that has the Son has a life. He that doesn't have the Son of God doesn't have life." And what that seemed very clear to me was that like I'm on the side of this evil, and I'm in trouble because I don't have the Son. And somehow I've got to have this Son in my life to be on the side of life. And somehow that just made really clear sense to me. So I still didn't understand how this Jesus Son thing gets into your life. And remember the guy saying, led people through this, put your trust in Christ thing, maybe a prayer. And I thought, well, I'm not sure I understand this. So probably for the next week, believe it or not, I don't even remember, a week, 7, 8, 9 days, I'd reread this over and over and over. And I kept saying, somehow, Jesus, if this is true, you got to get into me. Like I've got to enter into something with you, and I'm not sure what that means. So I would wait for the thunder and lightning to come through the ceiling. I would wait, every day I was like, okay, I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. I want this. And for days I literally would just I want this. Whatever this is, I want it. Somehow it's connected to you. Somehow you come into man's life. Somehow you give forgiveness. I want this. And so I just for days just kept asking, kept seeking, kept looking. And then I don't know for sure, Eric, how it all played itself out. I think I can explain it now biblically, theologically, but I remember coming to this place, not some virtuous, moral guy. I definitely wasn't that, but I just said, if you got to kill me to give me this, if somehow you literally have to take my life to give me this, you can have my life. Like I'm done. Whatever you got to do, whatever I got to do, my life's yours. And somehow in all of that kind of interaction with God over a number of days behind closed doors where nobody would know, I came to this place. I knew it was true. I knew it was real. And within days, really, I became like a different guy. Like I knew I was different. Like I got in a fight. I went down the hallway one day within that same time frame, that same 7, 8 days. And now we're on to 10th day, 11th day, 13th, 14th day, and I got in a fight with a guy in the hallway, cussed him out, threw him around, just being stupid. And I remember walking away from there, going back to my room, thinking I can't treat another human being this way. It's wrong. And I literally went down and knocked on the guy's door and asked him to forgive me. I mean, even using those words, and when I walked away from there, I thought, this is weird. This is not me. So something's happened. Something's happened to me. And then the final kind of part of my story there is I went back to this. I always hung out at this particular bar and did stuff. Anyway, I don't need to get into that. But I went back to this bar where I always hung out in, and I'm already starting to think maybe I should live life differently. Because if this is true, and I think I've just entered into something with Christ that's new, I probably shouldn't live like I used to. And I went back to the bar I hung out in, and I was standing there, and the song came on, I'm on a highway to hell. By AC/DC. And everybody flooded out to start dancing, and I thought, it's true. I still remember that. I was still standing there like, it's true. Like, it's absolutely true. And I was the same way 2 weeks ago. I would have went and danced and not thought anything of it. And I thought, somebody's got to tell them. So I almost jumped up on a table. I remember thinking, what do I do? What do I do? And so I literally ran out, got out of there as fast as I could. And I ran back to my room. And again, I didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't know what the Gospel of John was. But I still remember, 30 some, whatever it would be now, 36 years ago, saying, I'm so convinced this is true. I don't even understand why I'm convinced it's true. But if I could spend the rest of my life talking to people about it, it seems like it's the only thing that makes sense. And I've been doing that now for 36 years.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. And it's interesting how God's call on your life even, showed up that early.
Yeah. See, I'm almost embarrassed to talk about the story. I could start crying because, Eric, I didn't crank this up. Like, it just, this really did happen to me.
Yeah.
I can explain it now. I can put words with it. We call this regeneration, the Holy Spirit. We call it calling. There's, but at the time I didn't know. This makes sense. Boom, boom, and
Right.
And so I thought I'd be like early on, literally within a 2 or 3 week time frame, I came to know Christ, and there was a calling right then and there on my life that took 10 years to kind of unfold, in the sense of finally moved me to a place in young married life and children, and finally coming to a place where literally, if you will, vocationally, you kind of go full time into this thing. So
right.
So anyway,
that's great. Thanks for sharing that story. And I think it's amazing to hear just the way that God, you kind of connected with you through a movie you didn't even really want to watch. I mean, I'm kind of like you sounded. I'm a little skeptical of how effective those things are sometimes.
Right.
But I hear stories like yours, and I go, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what God wants to do with it. And so, all right, if somebody feels like He's asking them to do it, go do it. Then have a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've often wondered. I actually tried to track down that. Again, I think in the day we would have called it a resident assistant. He's kind of head of our dorm thing, and he put on this project, and he showed this film. And I've often wondered. I mean, I knew his first name was Ed, and he was from somewhere in northern Michigan. But I've always wondered, he did this thing, he walked away. Who knows? And here was this guy that, in the last 36 years now, I've been literally around the world telling people about Christ.
Yeah.
And that guy probably thought, that was a flop. I had 5 people show up to be interested.
Right. And he may not know until eternity the impact that his faithfulness had.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's what a great message for all of us, right? You don't know what God's going to do with it.
Right. And that's the thing we have to come to grips with, apart from the techniques, which, some are only developed in our culture and things. The gospel, this message really is this powerful thing that God uses to call people to Himself, and you just never know. The wind blows where it blows, right? You can see this all over Scripture. You have no idea what's going on.
Right. Right.
We try to measure it. Like these stories you're telling, Eric, you have no clue to what kind of pieces of the puzzle they mean for people. A little link here, a little piece here. And it all adds up to this unbelievable grandeur story,
Yep. Yeah, so, that's what gets me excited.
Yeah, it's cool. It's fascinating. It's just like, wow, right? So.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, so how did you grow from there? Because did you get hooked up with some believers there?
Yeah, I was still trying to figure that out. I did, though. I began to stumble into people that would tell me they're Christian, and I would get excited about that. And right away, again, not that I really understood it, and I didn't. I hope you catch the flavor of it. Would be like, it wasn't like I was preaching down to people, but I began to tell people, like, no, this is true. This is true. And so, if anything, I was telling people about this before I knew anything about Christian growth. I still didn't know hardly anything about the Scriptures. I just said, this is true. And so, so I kind of stumbled into a number of different people that would be Christians, and I'd talk to them and visit with them. And it's strange, for a number of years, I couldn't figure out how the church fit into it. Like, I wanted to talk to people about Christ, and I thought, there's this world out there I want to talk to. Can we go out there and talk to people? And then I would go to church, and it was dear. Don't get me wrong. When I would go, I would attend, and I'd learn things, and I'd be excited these people believe the same thing I do. But there was always this side of me that's like, well, what about all those people outside of here? Are we going to go talk to them? And that's all. That's where I was compelled to go all the time. And so I always had this tension, okay, you guys all come in here and you talk, but there's just really, if I could say, sinful people out there, and I want to go out there.
Yeah.
So So I kind of stumbled through that, to be honest with you, for a number of years. I met Christians, and they would kind of, there were different times I'd be like in a Bible study with some guys, and that was part of it. So even that, when you think of this idea of what some people in our culture, we would call it discipleship, Christian growth. There were pieces where I might meet with somebody for a time, and there were guys that came in my life saying, hey, let's get together for a while and learn something, and that was really good. In fact, I met a guy early on. His name was Mark. In fact, he's in ministry, in campus ministry in Michigan today even. But at the time, he was a motorcycle racer, motorcycle mechanic, and he said, hey, I would like to get together and do some stuff. And we had I don't even know how many weeks. It was a summer. We talked about the work of the Holy Spirit, and we would go out and talk to people about Christ. And it was just really a pretty special time in life. So I had those little nuggets like that, but I still didn't understand the big church thing. Like, how does this thing work? And so I would go, but I never, I just never knew how it worked for a long time. Like, I don't get it. Like, why don't we just go out there? And so,
yeah.
So I wasn't antagonistic. I just didn't know what to do with it. So,
no, well, what I hear in that is less even naivete and more just the enthusiasm that you had for telling other people about who Jesus is, which I'm guessing is probably one of your gifts, right? Would you consider yourself an evangelist?
Yeah. See, we could have a talk about that, but yeah, that's what I tried to shape and mold over my years, if you could say, my adult vocational ministry life, is like, what is an evangelist?
Yeah.
And I never heard of an evangelist search committee. I joke about it. People laugh. But think about what's a guy like me do, So even early on, I would go look maybe like at a seminary, and I'm okay, but you train guys to be pastors. I don't want to be a pastor.
Right.
I'm too mouthy and crazy to be a pastor. As I get older and calm down in life, I probably could, but it's still not I still would rather go out. I'm in the jail every week, for example. I'd rather go be with guys in the jail.
Yeah. Yeah, which is that's what God's called you to do. That's how He made you.
Yeah. So that was always from day one, that was in there. And it was just like, I didn't crank it up. I tell people it's like a duck landing on a pond. I'm just a duck. I don't know. It's just what I do. So yeah, I guess growth was, I had people in my life that would sit down. We'd study some Bible for a while. I had some guys that would help me go talk to people about Christ some. And so that kind of was, there was no, formal system of that per se. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Just different guys, and kind of, I'd have this guy, and then another guy. So there were a handful of 3 or 4 guys in my life, probably over a 10-year period, that gave me input in my life. You'd say mentoring, discipleship, you can call it what you will. And that was good. The other thing I would say, though, and I really do believe this is kind of even a theological persuasion to me, is that he that begins the good work will carry it on, will carry it through. And so God already rescued me, right? I didn't crank it up. He rescued me. And so he was committed to my growth. And so, I remember beginning to listen to Christian music. I can tell you today, certain early days of like contemporary Christian music, certain songs that actually were, Steve Camp.
Oh yeah.
Some of these early songs, that were even evangelistic about, I want to run a mission a yard from the gate of hell and all this stuff, And I think all that stuff really did shape my life.
Who did you like? Anybody else?
Well, I remember Steve Camp over and over. Keith Green. Green, oh my goodness. Days of Keith Green, you look at it, it's like, it wasn't even the greatest music, but there was something in those messages that stirred us,
Yeah. I was sorry. I was into Christian music too. I was a little later than you probably. So I was more into like the hair bands like Petra and Whiteheart and DeGarmo and Key. Yeah.
They would have been my next wave. Yeah, they would have been the next wave. I mean, not just next wave for, generationally, but yeah, I probably started Steve Camp, Keith Green, but then yes, there was Petra.
Yeah.
And some of those groups started coming through during those days. Yeah, right.
That's awesome. Okay. Anyway, you mentioned Christian music, and I had to talk about that a little bit.
I would think, but Christian music had a great big influence on my life. I would tell people that. Yeah, that's part of God's discipling me.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? People who using their gifts to disciple in ways that you probably just wouldn't expect.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so I'm always cautious in the term discipleship, is there's certainly a part of a human person sitting down and helping somebody else grow. But to me, discipleship is just, sanctification, and it's much bigger than just a person sitting down and going through a handful of lessons with somebody. That's good. I mean, God uses that, but that's not all there is to it,
Right.
And, there's suffering involved. And we did. I mean, in fact, that would be part of a cool story if I could share it with you.
Yeah.
So I'm in the university. I come to faith in Christ. I come home the following summer, and I'm invited to this basketball. I was a good basketball player, so I was invited to this basketball tournament by a good friend of mine. Now, the year prior, I don't want to get confusing here, but the year prior, just before going to college, this friend of mine kind of quit hanging out with me and some of our buddies. We always would go party and do stupid stuff. This guy quit hanging out with us. And we thought it was because of his girlfriend. But what had happened is this good friend of ours, that summer before I went away to college, had come to faith in Christ. And that's why he quit hanging out with us, and I didn't know it. So I go to college, I come to faith in Christ, and that summer, so I'm just a brand new believer, 2 or 3 months old in my faith, and like I said, I kind of talked to everybody about it. So this guy asked me to go play basketball. He'll totally laugh at this, in this basketball tournament. So we go play in this tournament together, and we're coming home from the tournament, and he said, you want to get a beer? And I said, well, to be honest with you, Cardi, I don't get drunk anymore. I came, I started telling him about this relationship with Christ, and I walked away from that whole lifestyle. And I said, I'm not opposed to a beer per se, but I just don't do that stuff anymore. And his eyes got all big, and he said, well, Dan, that's what happened to me last summer. He starts telling me how he had come to Christ.
Wow.
And why? So this is a total kick. You're going to laugh about this. But he said, we got to go celebrate. So we went and bought a six-pack and celebrated. He says, we can drink, but we can't get drunk. I'm like, yeah, cool, good,
We can drink the beer now that we're both Christians.
Oh, so he was there. He was one of those guys in my early days. But truly, within a few years of that, just 2 or 3 years later, she would have been 2, 3, 4 years later. After that, he was a young dad like me. His first baby, young marriage, and he was killed on a construction site.
Ooh.
And the Lord took him home. Young guy, 23, 24, 25 years of age. And I remember that. I guess what I was thinking about when I shared that with you is when I think of discipleship, God uses all these things. He uses suffering. He uses life. He uses death.
Yeah.
He used lots of things. We lost a child in those days. Actually, she was born and lived just a short time and died of birth defects. And there were lots of those kinds of things in a person's life that really did shape us.
Yeah, well, so I'm really curious about that because I think going through those experiences, you're right, they shape us. Part of what I like to share is how did they shape you? Do you want to tell us that story, or it's up to you? It's your story, but.
I have a lot of those chapters here.
Yeah, I understand.
I really do. With my wife and I have experienced a lot. I would say that even in the realm of suffering, I'd say we've had some really. I think everybody probably has if you listen long enough. But so it has to be more specific probably for me. But I would say through this. I can't think of one thing, but you can ask me. But let me say this.
Okay.
One of the things that I've recognized through suffering is that it's that sense of, like C.S. Lewis would write about this, like all the props have been taken away, all the incentives to follow God have been taken away. It's like, where are you? You've just taken a child, or I have some other. I'm in a dark chapter right now in some ways with, a difficult journey with one of my children, and it's just awful. I don't even want to talk about it, but there's these awful things, and we've had health things where I wonder, the wheels were coming off. I was on the ground 2 or 3 days a week with a disabling illness for almost 10 years, and it's like you go through all that. I think this is really what it means, the testing of your faith. I don't think testing of your faith is as much. I think even technically I could exegetically do the process in the Bible with you. It's not so much like God's there going, oh, I'm going to test you and see if you can pull it off.
Right.
I think God pulls all the props away. And then I sit here and I go, I believe every bit if not, I believe more now than I ever did. Like, I'm convinced. There's not a thing in my life that can. I go in universities with atheist arguments leveled at me and asking me questions and this thing and that thing. I am so convinced of the reality of God. I am so convinced of who He is. I'm so convinced He's good. And yet, I felt beat up. And I sit here and go, there's no props other than it's true.
Right.
I say to college and high school kids all the time, I'm like, there's only one reason to be a follower of Christ, because it's true. Because you can know it's true. There's only one reason. It's not for the therapeutic benefit, the props, anything else. Though I could say those things are real. God's done some really cool stuff. But so through all that, He's convinced me.
Yeah. Well, okay. So is there a story that you could share about a time when you were going through one of those suffering events that God brought you out of it or showed you how faithful He was?
Yeah. I'll tell you one that's been pretty special. Without laboring the chapter, but it was about a 10-year chapter where, in some ways, it felt like we had climaxed at a place of ministry. Not climaxed like to go down, but like at the place we'd always dreamed I'd be in ministry. In some ways, there were these opportunities and things were happening. I was being invited to do things. I was traveling. There was just a great time. I had 5 little children, and all of a sudden, I suffered this really difficult health stuff. It was an inner ear disease that literally caused me to get violent vertigo. It knocked me right down on the ground, and I'd be laying on the ground spinning. And there was no real answer for it. And I went to Mayo Clinic. And it was a long journey that, at any minute I literally could be laying on the ground. So it's not a seizure, but you might as well be having a seizure,
Yeah.
And you could lay there for hours. So how do you go to a Walmart if this happens in the middle? How do you do this if you're driving in the middle of traffic? How am I going to live life? And so it basically stopped me traveling overseas, and it felt like my life came to a halt, and went into depression, dealt with some anxiety, like panic attack stuff, and I'm like, I'm this 6'4" athletic kind of 220-pound guy, a lot of probably pride too, but just like, that stuff doesn't happen to me. And I'm disabled, and depression, no, not me. But yeah, it was real. Like, I was in trouble. And so I had a summer there where I had to just stop everything. And I had to get some medication to help my brain, and I had to try to figure out what to do. The summer didn't solve all the vertigo, but I literally couldn't function almost for about 6 or 8 weeks. And I laid in the dark during that time, and I would just read my Bible and lay low. And, I thank the Lord I had people who cared enough for us to keep, like supporting our ministry and giving me that time to, recover. Not, it was just the hand of God allowing me to be able to do that. But there was one day, this is an amazing story to me. Like, my one daughter was 4 at the time, my youngest. And she asked me if I could push her on the swing. So I went out, started pushing her on the swing in her backyard. I live in the country, and it's a nice little backyard. It's kind of pretty here. And so I'm pushing her on the swing. And truly, Eric, it was the only thing I could do that day, other than lay low and look at my Bible. I couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And I'm pushing her on the swing, and it was as the Lord probably spoke to me. I'm cautious about running around saying God said this to me and that to me, but there was these kind of words that came to my heart from the Lord that said, this is what I have for you today. And this was the burden I had. If I wanted you to go to Far East Russia and Khabarovsk, because I'd been in a place like that, and if I wanted you to go there and speak to thousands of people, I could easily put you there. But this is what I have for you today, is to push your daughter on the swing. And it just struck me. Like, God is in control of my life, and He calls the shots. Can I trust Him to do that? Now, here's what's a kick about that. That daughter, and all my kids are amazing. Even the one we were working through stuff with, they're gifted. They're beautiful kids. Love them all the same. But this one's 20 now. And dude, in the last few days, she's been in Sri Lanka. She shares her faith with everybody that breathes. She's been talking to girls that are Hindu and all sorts of religious girls and everything else. she's like, I call her a she-evangelist, you know. She remembers that.
Wow.
She remembers me pushing her on the sink. She remembers me telling her the stories of God speaking to me through her, just her passive life of being who she is. I mean, she didn't do anything but just be who she is, and God ministered to me through her, and really saved my life. Because I mean, I was that low that summer. I could have thought, you know, my family would do better without me here.
Yeah.
And there's a sense with that she saved my life without even knowing it. That was an amazing moment. And so to this day, I look at her and I think, man, what? Here's somebody in, you know, Sri Lanka today hearing the gospel. And if I wasn't there that day to push my daughter on that swing, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
And so the most important task that God had for me that day was not preaching to 20,000 people in the streets of Habar, Far East Russia. It was pushing my daughter on the swing. And in God's economy, it was the very thing, the most powerful thing that could have happened in the world.
Right.
And
Yes.
it was like, wow.
I was wondering about that. What your big takeaway from that was, because it sounds like it was, if I can paraphrase it, or I don't want to put words in your mouth, I guess, but it was that, hey, wherever God wants me to be is the place I need to be. And this investing in my child is the thing I'm called to do today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would just add to that, the word to me that comes to me is faithfulness.
Yeah.
called to be faithful. And the agenda, you know, it doesn't mean we don't strive and try to do well for the Lord, but at the end of the day, the agenda is the Lord's. And he stopped me. He pulled the rug out from underneath me and sat me on the bench. He says, "You're going to sit on the bench for a while, because I have some things to teach you."
Yeah.
And he did. He did. You know, so it was hard. It was dark, but wow. And there's other things too. We could talk about other things. There are things that God taught me in those days that he had to slow me down because I'm such a hyper bugger. You know, just to learn. Like, I didn't want to waste that time. I know that sounds weird, but when I was laying there were things I was contemplating and studying and reading that really have shaped my life and ministry to this day.
Yeah.
So,
do you remember a couple of those?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I could tell you that too. Yeah, well, for example, a man that I was always fascinated with because I thought he had such a pulse of the culture was Francis Schaeffer.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of Francis? Okay, so I've studied probably, I can't say everything Schaeffer's written, but I got a whole library of Schaeffer here. So I was studying Schaeffer a lot during those days, thinking a lot about that stuff, about culture and life. And one of the things that struck me during that day is it's hard to explain other than, you know, because my brain was so broke, my emotions and brain were so broke. I couldn't do a lot of abstract thinking as much as you might think. Like, even to read the Bible and close it, I probably couldn't tell you what I just read. It was like it was gone. And it was real hard. But one of the things that struck me during those days is I would lay there in my bed. And I remember the day I lay there. I still can remember this picture of the Bible was laying on my chest, and I was laying on my bed in tears, wondering what the Lord was going to do and how I was going to take care of this, you know, lovely little family. And I was trying to read some of the things that Schaeffer was talking about, and it struck me that God had spoken to us. I could have told you that before, but it was like, no, like God really spoke to us. Like we really, truly have a sacred, transcendent word from the God of the universe. And whether I ever fully get it figured out wasn't the issue. You know what I mean? We can rest. Just the fact to know that he did, that he has, saved my life.
Yeah.
In another way. Because what happened that summer, you know, and again, I say saved my life, it sounds dramatic. I guess there were 2 or 3 of those things that summer. But seriously, I was laying there thinking, I was kind of lost in my head. And maybe I think too much. This is, you know, kind of philosophical. But I'm like, how do you have a reference point for anything? If there is no transcendent voice, if there's no reference point outside of my own head, because my head was jacked up. Right. And I knew it was, but how do you get outside of it? I'm lost in my head. I'm panicking. I'm having thoughts. And I'm like, I can't control this. Like, my brain is broke. And if there's no reference point outside of my brain, we're all in deep trouble. and that's nihilism. That's Nietzsche. That's all these guys. And that's where they end up. And it's like, it's true though. You follow that track far enough. How do you know anything? And it deeply struck me during a lot of those dark days that God had truly spoken. And that's been anybody that gets around me knows that that's a theme of everything I'm always talking about, that God is really there. He's really spoke to us. And that's where I begin every discussion. Doesn't matter what you think about biology, sociology, you can think about anything, any field of study you want, and you got to go back and say, what's going to be your beginning premise?
Right.
And it's not me. I think God is there, and I think he actually really spoke.
Yeah, it's interesting. It sounded to me like God really took your view from looking at Scripture to looking at him as the speaker.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's.
I would say that. Yeah, and I would say he did speak to us, and there's things here that we need to get in and deep. But behind that is really God.
Right.
And so I try to convince even young people. I do a lot of like apologetic kind of discussion with. Listen, whether we can figure out all the creation stuff or not, like that would be an example. And like the fact is God is there. He spoke and he really created this thing. Now we can wrestle with the facts. We can wrestle with the science. We can wrestle with the text. But you can have an assurance and a confidence that God is there and he spoke, whether we know how old this thing is or not old this thing is or what happened or didn't happen. And I think there's a room to debate that stuff. But whether we ever get that all figured out doesn't take away anything from who God is.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would say I have this utter confidence somehow. I still have questions, but I have this utter confidence that he's there. That he is who he said he is, that he spoke, that he's good. And it isn't because I've had all this warm, fuzzy feelings and all these things that went my way. I've had some really difficult stuff, and I'm like, okay, he gives and he takes away. And I don't mean it in a stoic way. I've had a lot of tears, but but it's stable, it's stability, it's confidence.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm always really struck by. Even the fact that you wouldn't have this confidence if you didn't go through that period of time that was really shaky. Like if you hadn't had to trust God through that or had those moments when you had to just think about it, you wouldn't have today the confidence that he's going to bring you through some of the stuff you're going through.
Right.
Or even I think the ability to speak to other people from that confidence, maybe you wouldn't have that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, I wouldn't know anything other than what I've experienced, right? But
sure.
But I would tell people that's sort of when you ask these questions of me, I'm like, yeah, I think what suffering does, I think at least for me, this journey, obviously, again, I'm at this place where I can say, hey, lost my health, I've had some difficult relationships. I've had some really, I've lost a child in my hands. We had another child in our home that my wife, basically we wasn't a full foster care system, but it was a child that we kind of quasi-adopted in our home that died in our home while my wife was watching her. My best friend, best man at my wedding, as I've already shared with you, died a few years after we kind of came back together as friends. And I could go down a list of stuff like that for you. And I'm just totally convinced of who God is. It's amazing. I'm amazed at myself, sort of like,
yeah.
There's no other answer. You can level, and I'm serious. I've heard all the atheist stuff, and I'm like, those guys can level questions all day. For every one question they level at me, for the most part, they're borrowing from my worldview anyway. They've got 10 or 15 they're going to have to answer. I'm like, I'm just, again, I just sit here and go, 2 + 2 is 4, and you can keep trying to convince me, and I'll try to listen. I want to be a teachable guy even as I get older, but I just don't think it's 5 or 3.
Yeah.
So I'm convinced God's there. I'm convinced he spoke. I'm convinced who Christ is. I'm convinced he walked on this earth. We can actually know him and have a relationship with him, experience forgiveness, and experience his presence.
Yeah.
There are other things. There are other things I'm not sure. The things I'm not sure of. Well, sure. Well, yeah. But that's all right.
Yeah. Well, take us up. So I want to go back to your story a little bit. Take us up from
Yeah.
Like from, I guess maybe that point, I don't quite know the timeline, but take us from that point to today and to how you got into your current ministry.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I can do it quickly. So I came to faith in Christ, you know, what, it was done at the university. Actually, at that time, it doesn't matter. I didn't fully finish a degree yet, but I went and began to work in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with the Amway Corporation in downtown Grand Rapids in their hotel industry, and worked there for 5 or 6 years, so from basically 20, 21, 22 till like 25, 26. And during those years, I was meeting with these different guys, growing, wondering, okay, I started a young family at that time. My wife was a nurse. This job I had was just really, they were just awesome people to work for. It was a great experience. But all that time I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do for the long haul? And I was thinking about different things, but back in the backdrop of my mind the whole time was like, I just really want to talk to people about Christ. I remember like everybody would be around me like, Rudman, like this is again the ducks landing on ponds thing. So I looked at seminaries and I looked at different things. I really I like all that stuff. I like the stuff you learn, but I want to go talk to people about Christ. And I really at that time just I'm sure there was people out there that could have helped me, but I didn't know where to go for that. So I ended up at the age of about 26, 27 or so, ended up by going on staff with the Ministry of Campus Crusade for Christ, but not on a campus, but working in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the community, in the kind of the business community, if that makes sense. So I'd go into offices and meet with guys and, restaurants and coffee shops and share Christ with guys and learn how to do basic follow-up with guys. And that's kind of how I began life in that world, that ministry world, And so I did that in Grand Rapids, Michigan for almost 6 years. So kind of into my early 30s. And during that whole time, so my family's developing. My wife and I, we're growing. We've been married about 10 years. And at that point, I guess 4 children. Lost one child during that time, so we actually delivered 5. And then I still had these great questions. Like, so what's it look like? This would be the seminal question in my mind is what's it mean to be an evangelist? And what would it look like to be an evangelist in this culture? Historically, what was an evangelist? What biblically, what is this? We have these systems, and I could do the systems, and I learned tremendous skills from the systems and the techniques. But beyond that, what is this?
Yeah.
I'm not a Billy Graham. I'm not in a stadium. Again, I've shared with you. I like being with the everyday guy on the street, sharing with him, talking with him, engaging him. I can do the bigger talk thing, which I enjoy. But what's this look like? So in our early 30s, we had this opportunity. Actually, I had a class within Campus Crusade. I was at a place one summer. I had a class with a guy by the name of J.P. Moreland.
Oh, yeah.
That absolutely shaped my life. I mean, like just, and he was in my apartment complex, and I met with him and said, I need to talk to you about this. And I began to really realize there's a whole life of the mind, life of formation is this thinking well and understanding knowledge and understanding how to communicate these things. And so I left that conference with 4 kids and a wife thinking, how in the daylights can I go get more education? So we ended up by going to seminary in Southern California. We left, I was 32, and we were still on staff at Campus Crusade, and they gave us this kind of, I don't know what they called it at the time, but they allowed us to, under the umbrella of Crusade, as people on staff at Crusade, we were assigned to go to seminary. And so we spent the next 3 years in Southern California in seminary. And I worked on a master's degree. Same thing. It was like there were a lot of pastoral classes. I wasn't really interested in that. So they actually let me kind of develop my own hybrid even then.
Oh, nice.
You got to start getting a sense of my personality. I'm like really outside the box all the time.
Yeah.
And it was really, for lack of better words, you'd call it, a master degree in call it evangelism, or the work of the evangelist in church renewal. I mean, that's really what it was. So there's some apologetics there. There was different kinds of evangelism, history of evangelism, leadership stuff, and then of course all the core stuff, Greek and New Testament, Old Testament, all the theology stuff is the core. And so with that, I was 35, and I said I want to go try what's going to look like to be an evangelist in a local community and have an influence on that community for the long haul. That's what I was after. So we moved here to Kansas.
Well, how
Go
did
ahead.
you choose Kansas though?
Yeah, that's a good question too.
Because
I don't know if I tell a young guy to do. Yeah,
if
good question.
if I could choose a lot of places, I'm thinking San Diego. I'm thinking
Oh yeah.
Orlando.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let me tell you. I mean, like here I was in Southern California, and I'm an outdoorsy guy. Believe me, I was looking at Colorado and Denver and Montana, and I mean, like, I love the mountains, you know, and it's almost comical. Okay, so I had an acquaintance, just a guy that I knew from seminary, had one class but didn't really know him, and he told me about this area, and I'm like, really? And so I came and checked it out, and you'd think, why would anybody move here? But here's the deal. There were a handful of things I was looking for. I wanted to be someplace where there was a high influence of, if you could say this, a secular world. It's a thing that Schaefer had been talking about for years. What's it look? A truly secular place. Certainly East Coast, West Coast, you can find that stuff, big cities. But I wasn't a big city guy, but is there a place like that where it's not churches climbing on top of each other? There really is a tremendous need to bring the gospel to bear in a secular world. And somebody had told me about Lawrence, Kansas, where the University of Kansas is. And there were these little, I don't know where they came from. There were these little, what's the word? Little names for Lawrence, Kansas, you know, the Berkeley of the Midwest.
Yeah.
You know, the Berkeley on the prairie kind of thing, you know, and again, I don't know where those came from, but people would say that. And I came here and sure enough, I found it out. I'm like, look at a small city, 30 miles west of Kansas City, 100,000 people. And there might be 10 or 15,000 people in church of this, you know, of any kind of church in this city. And so for the most part, it's a very dominated university town, very, you know, maybe a little bit less radical, but very, very close to like a Boulder.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I thought, what would it look like to come here? And, you know, I was close to the center part of the country, so I'm like 8 hours from lots of different places where there were people I wanted to associate with and develop this work. So it was kind of a hub a little bit. So there was that. And so, you know, honestly, this will sound really weird, but I didn't trust myself moving to the mountains because I thought I might want to go there for the wrong reason. And I'm not so sure that's wrong for people, by the way, in my life now. But at the time, I was very suspicious of myself. So I thought to move to Kansas would have no other motive but this unique setting to be in ministry, because there's no other reason to come here.
Gotcha.
So I told my wife about it, and she had never seen it. We talked about it. And you'd have to know my wife was very geared towards our kids and very different personality than me. Very wise, godly woman. And I remember when she said it, she said, if we don't do this, we'll always wonder if we should have. I think we need to go and do this. And so we really parachuted in here. We pioneered in here with one acquaintance and started from scratch. Wow. Rented a place, moved my family here, and that was 21 years ago. Let's see. This is 22 years ago. And I just went into this community and began to pray and ask God to open doors. And first month I was here, I met had a guy come to my rental house to work on the landlord, the person that owned the home. There was a problem in the house, and the guy came to work on the house. Turned into me having a conversation with him, and within days, that guy gloriously came to faith in Christ. I mean, to this day, he's in our church, walks with God. And he was kind of a hell-raising, motorcycle-raising, beer-drinking guy here in this community. And I wasn't even here just a matter of weeks, and he comes to faith in Christ and opened up a whole world to me.
Wow. Yeah, so that might be confirmation that God was calling you there.
Yeah. And that happened in a few different scenarios, literally in the first few weeks I was here. And I was like, yeah. And so that started this ball rolling, and I've been here ever since. So.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you do a lot of really interesting ministries, like you said. You visit the prisons, and and you do. Tell me about some of the other stuff that you do.
Yeah, I love. It really comes down to, as you look at a community, you see these different areas, and I'm always just burdened about how do we take the gospel there. So even some people think, you have a prison ministry. You know, I don't even think of it that way, because I really don't. I just go there every week. I have for 18 years. Guys pile in a room and they can ask me anything they want, 10 to 20 guys every week pretty much. And they can, is the Bible for real? Is this baloney? I've read this. What do you think about this? And by the time I'm done, my whole goal is get them to one point, to understand the work of Christ, and they need to turn from their sin and trust Christ. And I've been doing that for 18 years. I do it with business guys and relationships. I do it in different kinds of studies. And, of course, the university here, and that has opened up. And I do a little bit itinerant with the historically. I travel. Like next week, I'll be in North Dakota speaking on campuses. And that's more of kind of the apologetic kind of thing, where I may give a quick talk on the knowledge of Christ, the knowledge of God, why this is real, and then open it up for questions. And, might be like a panel discussion. I've done panel discussions with, Islamic imam, me, and Jewish leader, our Jewish scholar. I've done, answering questions like that, speaking to students. So I see all these different avenues, and I'm always looking for how can you take the gospel there? How can you take the gospel there? How can you take the gospel there? And so it's either training guys to take the gospel somewhere, helping somebody that's just beginning to walk with Christ get connected to the church, or actually taking the gospel somewhere.
Yeah.
And of course, in our new world that we live in, which isn't necessarily new. Again, guys like Schaefer and others were telling us about this, but, we live in a secular society.
Mm-hmm.
It's pluralistic, it's relativistic, it just is. What it is. So how do you bring the gospel to bear on that?
Yes, we can lament the fact that it's not as Christian as it once used to be, and I'm doing scare quotes around Christian because I'm not sure it was ever as Christian as we would like to remember.
Yep.
But we have to deal with the reality of who the people are around us, or we don't care about them, or we don't love them. You just you have to do that.
It's like, so when I hear people lamenting and I hear this politics stuff, I'm like, in my mind, if I could say it, you could say the train left the station, but like, no, this is what it is. And we need to learn how to do this. And, guys like Tim Keller were doing it in New York City, and trying to say, hey, we need to get good at this.
Yeah.
In the cities and in our university cities, because it's going to spread everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to ask you one more question.
Sure. Yeah.
So what would your advice, because not everybody has this gift that you have. So what would your advice be to somebody who maybe just, they get up every day, they go to work, they come home, they hang out with their family, and they go to church on Sunday, or maybe once during the week, or a Bible study or something? What advice would you give them for just being a faithful representative of Christ in that area, and maybe to even open up some conversations in a way that people would respond to?
Oh yeah. I think we have to learn to ask people questions. We have to love people enough to ask them questions about themselves. In fact, some of my kids said, Dad, you talk to everybody like this? I can go to gas stations. Like there's gas stations I go in town. I'm going to go to the same gas station for one reason, because there's people in there that I've met behind the counter and got to know a little bit. And it's amazing to me, how are you doing today? Oh, my leg's hurting. Why is your leg hurt? Next thing you know, they're going to tell you all about their health history, all about their life, just by asking 2 or 3 questions.
One question,
and
right?
And in there, sooner or later, you can say, well, have you ever thought about spiritual stuff at all? Like, when you think about pain and, your face and this stuff, is God ever come into the picture? The reality of maybe there's somebody out there. And I could, we could talk more about that, but learning to ask people questions like that, it is amazing what people will tell you.
Yeah.
and you show you care. And, there's a lot more to that, but offering people questions, or, hey, I see you have that little cross on your neck. Have you ever thought about what that means? I'm just wondering what that means. It's amazing what people will tell you.
Yeah.
I say, what it historically represented is a real guy that walked on the earth who actually claimed to be God. Did you know that? It's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And they kind of look at you, And so my point is there's something about loving people. I would actually say that there's something about loving people enough to ask questions and probe life a little bit and learn how to do that. And you don't have to be crazy about it. You don't have to be weird about it, And,
right. And then just listening to the answer and letting them be heard. That's so powerful.
Oh, man, it just opens the doors, and then you have a place to set a little thing. I think that's part of understanding the nature of witness. And that is, Eric, like in many cases, I'm not going to give how do I say it? I'm not going to give the whole thing. I may plant one little seed, one little thought, have you ever thought about maybe like the guy that represented that thing really walks this earth, and it's like real. If that's all it is, like God can take that and do stuff with that.
Yeah.
And if we were all doing that, oh my goodness.
Yes.
and then I believe God weaves all that together. I believe in a sovereign God who actually weaves that whole thing together.
Yes. And so I'll just close with this. I think that your story is proof of that. One guy, right? Sharing a Josh McDowell movie.
Yeah, he tried to do this thing and, probably didn't
had no idea that God was going to use you in this way.
Yep. And literally from that one little thing, and I'm not because I'm special, but literally I was in Ethiopia last summer, Egypt. I go to lots of different places in the world. There's people all over the world who've heard the gospel because this guy, probably 21 or 22-year-old guy, showed this old little film in a dorm lobby and probably had 5 or 6 people showed up and thought it was a big flop.
That's awesome.
Isn't that? And it just puts God on display. No man can take credit for any of this.
Right.
And so in this community, that's what even my work in life. I'm like, I want Christians to see this. I want to engage this. And I couldn't begin to tell you. I could tell you lots of stories of people I've met in different places. They're like, I want to tell you something. I ran into you. You said this to me. I'm like, really? I did.
Yeah.
I know Jesus today because you came there and said that. I'm like, really? Wow. And so it's this incredible adventure God's called us to be in part of. So praying and giving and being faithful and asking questions is what I would say.
Oh, awesome. Wow. Well, thanks so much for the time, Dan. I appreciate it. Hey, actually, before you go, one more thing. Is there any, how could somebody get in touch with you if they wanted to, or do you have a website or?
Yeah, I'm working on a better website, but to get access to them, you could go to, the ministry I'm a part of, and they need to come up to speed a little bit to get better, but you could track me down at afci.us, and you would see my name on there, Dan Rudman, Rudman, and there'd be some links there with my, my cool. email and that sort of thing. I can even say that to you right now, Dan Rudman, my name at usa.net.
Perfect. Well, I'll link that up, and if people want to, if they're curious about this, they can reach out to you.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would tell you is there is over the last years, I talked to a lot of people about, over these years of Christian growth, and I don't know if you want to link this up on there, but some people challenged me over all these napkins I draw on, and I'm in bars and grills and draw on stuff, and somebody challenged me to put the stuff on paper, so I did. Kind of the key things I talked to people about. And a friend of mine that took all that and put it into like this computer app thing. It tells you how low tech I am, but like you can pop it up on your phone, you can put it on your internet, and it's you, like YOU, disciple, like the word disciple, you disciple, no spaces, you disciple .me, M-E. And it's just cool. Like foundational Christian stuff, like. But I would tell anybody, if like personally you go through that, you want to sit down with somebody and help them grow, a dad wants to sit with his kids, and if you got that stuff nailed down, you'd be light years ahead.
Very cool. I hadn't heard of that, but I will definitely link to that.
It's all kind of new, but it's kind of an interactive, it's got the scriptures, it's got some YouTube clips in it. It's just kind of a cool little deal.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, I'll link it up. And so everybody can go out to the show notes and for this page, and you can find it there.
Okay, man, this is awesome.
Dan, thanks so much for sharing your story there, brother. I definitely appreciate your openness and vulnerability there. You are just a real inspiration, so thanks for that. Friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this episode of Halfway There. It's, like I said, episode 41. We're trucking along. We're definitely getting along in the number of episodes, and I'm glad to say that each one has a message, has something that will help you just grow in your faith, to trust God just a little bit more, or maybe with one more decision. That's my goal, and I hope that it has that effect for you. If there's a way that Halfway There encourages you or leads you or helps you figure something out or trust God in a certain way, hey, would you let me know? You can do that at halfwaytherepodcast.com. Hit the contact button up at the top. That goes directly to my email, and I would love to hear from you, hear how God is using the show in your life, and if you have any questions, I can answer those too. Hey guys, I've got a great episode for you next week. That's going to be a good one. Until then, keep the faith, friends.